This is Pete Fletzer. On this episode of ATG Cast, we bring you Podcast of the Whills talking Return of the Jedi with writer Mark Newbold.
Palpatine's ready to ditch Vader in a heartbeat if he can replace him with Luke.
Right.
Because Luke could be the Anakin that never was.
You're listening to the podcast of the Whills.
Welcome to ATG Cast, your source for Star Wars conversation, and welcome to our first episode of 2022. Hey, if you're a new listener, welcome aboard. So glad that you could join us. And if you're a returning visitor, well, you may have noticed a little bit of a change in that intro, or something new anyway, and I'm really excited to let you know that we have made some changes around here, and I think you're going to love them. First of all, I've joined forces with my good friend, and not coincidentally, last week's guest, Nick Mielke, and we're going to begin serving up his Podcast of the Whills show in our stream alongside Around the Galaxy. And of course, we are still going to continue to bring you Disturbances in the Force, your weekly no-spin Star Wars news digest. Every Saturday morning. We did take off the holiday season, so it's been a couple weeks since we've given you that, but look for it coming once again next week. So starting this week, we are going to be bringing you Podcast of the Whills, and then next week, you'll get Around the Galaxy, and then the week after that, Podcast of the Whills, and then Around the Galaxy, and we'll alternate weeks back and forth with our two interview shows. Now, they're very similar, but they're also quite different, because what makes Nick's show different is the way he describes it, and it's spot on, is Podcast of the Whills is a show that treats Star Wars canon like a sacred text. He essentially does like a deep dive, almost a Bible study, into the themes and questions answered and questions posed by your favorite Star Wars films. And so actually over the next 6 Podcast of the Whills episodes, he and his guests, and his guest list is amazing. Well, they're going to take a look at Return of the Jedi, and that kicked off this week with Mr. Mark Newbold. So one last thing, what does adding Podcast of the Whills to the stream mean? Well, it means that I'm going to be working alongside Nick so that we can collaborate. We can continue to bring you the positive, high-quality Star Wars conversations that you've come to expect that from me, and you've certainly come to expect that from Nick. So over the coming weeks, we're also going to be incorporating his live stream recording sessions into our Patreon exclusive live virtual audience. So if you join us at patreon.com/ATGcast, you can be a part of the conversation. You can still follow us on all your social media outlets at ATGcast, and visit us at atgcast.com for previous episodes and info on the show. And next week, Around the Galaxy returns with our special guest, YouTuber Kyle Katarn. Also, I am pleased to announce the return of a show that I used to love, and I'm excited to be doing once again. Streaming Star Wars will return live on Friday nights. Myself, Nick Mielke, and you will be taking a look at the Star Wars news of the week and focusing on Disney Plus's Book of Boba Fett. And, then whatever new Star Wars show comes next. So.
Hey, Pete.
Hey, AT, Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Look, I'm not that happy with you right now.
Okay, why? Why now?
Well, no, I mean, you gave a show to this Nick Mielke
I didn't
guy.
give a show to Nick. He's been doing it since like 2017.
Oh, wow, that is quite a while.
Yeah, he's been doing it for a while.
Okay.
So I'm happy.
Right.
I'm excited to be partnering with him.
I'm just a little irritated.
Why?
I was thinking maybe you'd give me a show.
Why would I?
I can interview people.
No.
Look, if you can interview people.
Okay, see, that's not really nice. No, that's not nice. Why don't you interview?
Well, let me see if I can find a review
I was going to say, why don't you?
of the Whills then.
Yep. Yeah, see what you got.
This one comes to us from Apple Podcasts, and it is from somebody named Brian B.G.
Hello, Brian.
And it says, I love this podcast.
Awesome.
Nick is such a solid dude, and it's very clear on your first listen. Whether he's talking to a guest or studying a scene, he approaches Star Wars from a passionate place. Ew, gross.
Okay,
and
come
is
on.
so engaging with his guests. Give this podcast a listen. It's a great one.
See, this is why I'm so excited to be collaborating with Nick now.
I'm going to have to go through this for every episode, aren't I?
Yes, you will. And now, Podcast of the Whills after these messages.
It is with great pleasure that I welcome to the show my friend, Mr. Mark Newbold.
Evening? Well, evening for me.
Evenings. It's getting closer to evening for me, too. We'll take it. We'll allow it. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thank you for inviting me on. Yes, I'm a total. I'm terrible at just asking to go on people's podcasts. I just invite myself in, put the kettle on. So yeah, that's me.
It's a great way to go, and it's a great way to get plugged in and involved. And so I may have to start utilizing that move myself and just start telling people, hey, put me on your show, see what happens. Well, as we said, you are in jolly old England. You're across the pond from us over here. So it's 9:00 at night. So I'm especially thankful that you're willing to kind of wrap up your day and hang out and talk with us a little bit.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, let's start here. Tell us just a little bit about Mark. Give us some general information, some intro to who Mark is and Mark in Star Wars.
Oh, wow. Where do I start? So, obviously, being in the UK, we got Star Wars a little bit later than you guys. We got it at the end of 77. Rolls out to the rest of the country in 78. So, I sort of hop on the Star Wars train in about March of 78. So, my first experience with Star Wars, I guess, would be the weekly comic. So I got issue 6 of the weekly comic my aunt got for me, and then pretty quickly Star Wars takes over the whole world, including the UK, which obviously I'm spiritually close to because it's where the films were made mostly. And we had a great experience because we only had 2 years between Star Wars and Empire, if you think about it. So Empire comes to us really quickly, and by Empire everyone's really nuts and crazy into it. By the time we get to Jedi, which of course we're going to talk about, Star Wars has literally taken over the whole planet. And social, there's no social media, but socially it's a massive thing. Everybody knows what Star Wars is. Darth Vader is a household name. And I'm one of those kids that didn't walk away, didn't leave Star Wars. It always stayed with me, even when, you know, you get interested in girls and then you start to drive and then you go to work and all the other things. Star Wars stayed in the background because, you know, back in the 80s and 90s, being a sort of what you would call like a geek kid, like now it's the complete norm, then not so much. So I was known as this, the Star Wars kid or the sci-fi kid or whatever it might be. Nobody bats an eyelid now, but back then it was a bit different. So yeah, I've just always been in and around it, wrote fanfic. Wow, 40 years in May since I wrote my first fanfic. That's scary. Got online as soon as I could, sort of mid-90s, and started doing sort of Star Trek sites and sci-fi sites, and then a Star Wars site, and it just developed. I did a site called Lightsaber for 10 years. Then I joined Jedi News for about 7 years, and then 5 years ago, just under 5 years ago, struck out and did FanthaTracks. So it's been, it's a lot of Star Wars.
You're one of those people, and I'm always excited when I have somebody like this on my show who has in their CV that little thing, which is a bio on StarWars.com. Like that feels like you've made it. That feels like you've gotten somewhere, and you've built on that. Cause like I said, we've said, you've written for Insider, you've written for StarWars.com, FanthaTracks, which is something that you started and have, continued to shepherd along the way. And that's grown as the medium has into even podcasting. You do a podcast and, of course you're on so many podcasts. Tell us about that transition, because like you, I grew up with Star Wars. I may be just a little bit younger than you, but like I saw, Jedi in the theater, and then, grew up through the 90s and had all the EU and kind of the same thing, to be the kind of Star Wars fan that I was not a really out and popular thing in the early 90s. But as we've grown along and where we are now, fandoms and these kinds of things are completely different. So talk about that, but also in relation to the changing medium, going from fanfic writing to websites to now doing podcasting, and what that experience has been for you.
It's been very interesting, actually. I mean, like you say, it did start off with the fanfic. Just as kids, I'd got an issue of, would have been Empire Monthly, I guess, that we had here in the UK, different to your Empire Monthly, because it was broken down like a weekly with different backup strips and such, and just decided, read an issue, it's sort of the hello, best been goodbye sort of era, the mid-Empire to Jedi run, and just decided to write my own sequel to an issue, fully knowing that there would be the next story next month, but I just wanted to see what I could do. And sort of wrote my own version of that and just kept writing. But I think the real big change, and it's weird because people talk about a sort of 87 to 91 as the dark times. I was as busy as I've ever been during that time, because we were West End Games role play 3 nights a week. So, and making up our own stuff. We never used any of the adventure kits. We made up our own stuff. So that continued beyond into fanfic. And so the first site, Wirzone, which was my first Star Wars site, that became Lightsaber, that was it was all fanfic. It was basically our own sector guide turned into a website. But, you know, we got to a certain point in the mid-2000s, 2005, and we were putting a little bit more news on the site, and the fanfic was taking a bit of a back seat. We started a podcast then called Setting Radio, which was based on our area of space that we were writing our stories in. And that just became its own little thing. We would talk about Star Wars and Trek and, you know, the latest DC and Marvel comics and all sorts of stuff. And it just sort of moved on from there. And the Insider came in 2006. I got lucky enough to interview the editor at the time, Frank Parisi, and just sort of said, what do I do to get something in the Insider? To get one thing in the Insider would be the dream, just to say I'd done it.
Sure.
So it was 16 years ago, whatever it was. And it just sort of went from there. I got lucky again with StarWars.com. I did a piece about Star Wars in Concert. It used to be called Star Wars: A Musical Journey. Covered the premiere of that at the O2, and that got put on StarWars.com. And my proudest thing of that was they used one of my photographs, and I am an appalling photographer, so I'm more proud of that than the article. And it just they wanted to push on with the blogs back, you know, from the mid-2000 blogs that we all used to be a part of. They wanted to push on to what we've got today. It's just been, I mean, I'd like to think I'm halfway decent at what I do, but I think there's been a lot of good luck and good fortune, and I've spoke to the right people, and it's sort of bimbled along quite nicely. And then in the background, I've always done websites, so every day there's something from me on FanthaTracks, or there's something from me, you know, here or somewhere else, or speaking to Pete or whatever it might be. You know, I'm always doing something.
That's right. Well, that's a good way to be, because especially now, and as we've said with, you know, pretty much every show that either I do or somebody else does, we're kind of in a golden era of Star Wars right now with all the things that we've gotten up to this point, but everything we know that's ahead of us. And that's so exciting, especially for content creators, for people like me and you. That's more to talk about. I joke all the time that with this podcast, when we first started with our original Canon study, when we finished those 6 episodes, there was a moment of like, what are we going to do now? And we did, you know, a couple of movie things. I think Last Jedi had come out. Yeah. But then when Mando dropped that first season, that was 8 weeks of guaranteed content, because every week we were talking about that episode. So when that series stopped, I thought, well, now what? And there's no now what at this point. Like, we know we've got so many things, even just this year, but then all the things that are coming beyond that. So, you know, it has to be a good feeling for you, and certainly all the different places that, you know, the different irons you have in the fire, to know there's plenty more Star Wars to come.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and the thing with us is, with the podcast, for example, the focus is FanthaTracks. That's the hub. We've got busy social media. We've got Sunday night sort of magazine show, if you like, called Good Morning Tatooine. It's on most Sunday nights. That's live like this. Sure. At the same time, 9 o'clock UK, so we would clash. And that's good fun, you know. But the podcasts are great fun. I've been doing Making Tracks now for early 2018. I think I launched that, because I did Radio 1138. Which was at Jedi News before that, and part of Shot Glass, which was Rebel Force Radio's thing. And, you know, so I've been doing stuff before that anyway. So to me, it feels like a continuation of that, but it's not. But yeah, it's just good fun. And the podcast kind of fits nicely with the website, because if we do a review of something like Stranger in the Strange Land, for example, the episode that we've got coming out on Tuesday will go into the review, and it all sort of fits in with each other. So, yeah, lots going on.
Tell me about your first time seeing Jedi. Do you remember where you saw it, what happened, anything about that moment? And then maybe follow that up with, which I think I kind of teased in the intro, your first published thing was also related to Return of the Jedi. So tell us about your Return of the Jedi origin, since we're going to be heading in that direction. Yeah,
I have a very shady history with Return of the Jedi. Shady in the sense that I had a friend who's still a friend years and years later, whose dad worked in the Middle East and would get pirate videos of stuff. So we saw the Blues Brothers and E.T. and all that sort of early 80s classic stuff, way before we should have seen most of it. And he sent over a copy of Return of the Jedi to us. Bearing in mind, the UK got Jedi a little bit later than you guys in the States got it. So the first time I saw Jedi was a really rough copy, like heads at the bottom of the screen, sort of, nice. You know, the old tracking would go, and real rough copy of Jedi, which gave me a sense and enough. I'd read the novel already, the James Caan novel. I'd read the novel because back then the books came out before the films. So I'd read the novel, and, you know, and I kind of knew enough. But seeing it at the cinema, it was the same cinema I actually saw the original Star Wars. It was the ABC in Canon, which is where about 3 miles from where I live now. Proper old school British cinema, velvet floors, velvet walls, proper old flea pit. Fantastic. And of course, everyone's talking about it at school. As I said earlier, biggest thing. I mean, it never surpassed E.T. at the box office, but I think culturally it just got a hold of the zeitgeist so quickly. And still does, really. If you think about it, Jedi is one of the most recognizable of all the Star Wars movies. Visually, there's so many visual things in it that people identify with. And yeah, you refer to the published thing. This was a big moment for me. Not all of us, but most of my crowd would collect Star Wars Weekly and Empire Weekly and then monthlies, and it became Return of the Jedi Weekly when obviously the film came out. And I sent a letter off in hope that maybe Cyril, who was the editor, he was a droid with the baseball cap on, he was the editor of the fan page, the writing page on the UK mag, would add my letter in. And he did. So my letter was the first one, written not as myself, but as Jan Lamona. Jan Lamona was my fanfic character. And so there's Jan Lamona. So anybody who doesn't know Jan wouldn't know that the J is pronounced as a Y. So I had loads of letters, because I put my address in back in the day when you put your address in. I had loads of letters come to me, Jan, Janet, Janice, thinking I was a girl fan, which is kind of cool. I was horrified as a 12-year-old kid. I was horrified, kind of offended. But
it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Just
a bit. But that was so special seeing the name in print. And I think by then I was part of I was getting FanthaTracks from the States, because FanthaTracks is a play on FanthaTracks. So, that's where the fandom was really starting to kick in then. Being a part of the official fan club was very special.
Absolutely. That's such a cool story. And so it's neat to me. And it's, as our friend George likes to say, it's like poetry, it rhymes. And here you are all these years later, and you write for a living and you write about Star Wars. And so for it to have that earliest, beginnings in Star Wars, but also in Jedi, which is also important for where we are today and what we're going to talk about. I really, really love that so much. So I have one other question for you kind of about your Star Wars journey, and this can be anything. And I think I prepped you for this question a little bit, but if not, it's fun to put people on the spot. Because this is a show that treats Star Wars like a sacred text, and because, for all of us that love Star Wars the way you and I do, and all of our friends who watch and listen, it can be a very sacred thing. It can be something that, truly, I say all the time, I've literally had Star Wars my entire life. Star Wars came out in 1977. I was born in 1978. There's never been a time I haven't had Star Wars, and it has been formational for me in so many different places along my life, along the way. So my question for you and for all of my guests, and I love hearing what they say, is what is your Star Wars spiritual moment or spiritual experience? What is something where it could be a first viewing, it could be a career, whatever it is, where it hit you and there was something more there than just, oh, this is Star Wars?
You did prime me for this, and I really had to give it some thought, because I think as a kid, you don't know any different until something hits you, like Star Wars came out of left field for us. And it was, in the UK, all we had was Doctor Who with wobbly sets and Star Trek with painted walls, and and it was such a nuclear blast in that sense, in terms of quality and just presentation. It was just light years ahead of anything else. So I thought, well, do I say that? When I thought about it, it's quite late on, and it might sound odd. Both my parents passed away way too young. Mom was 59, Dad was 63, way too young.
Okay,
and they were young parents.
Sure.
And through Mom being ill and Dad being ill, and this is probably going to sound cold, but I hope it doesn't. I didn't miss a day posting to the websites I was working on. It was an absolutely cathartic experience to be able to sit down with Star Wars and not block it out, because you can't block it out. It's not going to change. It's going nowhere. But just to lose myself just for a few minutes in just the minutiae of posting an article, doing the pictures, adding the links, just trawling through, because a lot of anyone that does a podcast, anyone that writes a website knows there's a lot of donkey work. It's not all glamorous. Absolutely. There's a lot of just plodding through and just getting it done. And Star Wars was an escape in a very positive sense through Mom being ill, and then later, a couple of years later, my dad was suddenly taken ill and he went as well. Sure. And I'm kind of going through it right now. I've got an aunt who I love very much who's very ill, and I know that will help get through. Maybe that's not a spiritual thing, but it's such a crutch in a positive way that's something I feel, and I'm already knee deep in Star Wars when Mom falls ill in 2008. Sure. So but I didn't quite realize how helpful it was.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, and I think I would actually take issue with you saying it's not necessarily a spiritual. I think it is a spiritual thing in the sense that that's the balm that soothed your soul through those tough moments. And we've all been there. We've had moments of difficult life situations, whether it's a loss of a family member, a job. I've talked about on this show, my career changed 2 weeks before the pandemic hit 2 years ago. And I spent about a year unemployed and sorting out my career. And it was right around the time that I pivoted to this new version of Podcast of the Whills. And it was a big part of not only that healing, but also dealing with a national pandemic and dealing with, we all, honestly, I think this community has grown so much over the course of these last 18 months to 2 years because we couldn't go anywhere, but we could do this and we could connect with friends. And I've said, selfishly, when it comes to doing shows and getting guests, before pandemic and before really the blow up of Zoom, when we realized we could do meetings and we could do all these things, guests were not necessarily as big of a deal because you had to be near somebody or we had to do it together. And all of a sudden the world got a lot smaller and we all realized, hey, I can talk to a guy in London or England, or I can talk to, Christina Ariel in California, or I can talk to Pete in New Jersey. Yeah. And we can grow. And even if you've ever seen, floating around Twitter, the Force Connect groups that get to Friday nights, we said for a long time, it was the pub that none of us could go to for the last 2 years. But on Friday night, we could all have a drink, be silly, and talk about Star Wars and other things. Yeah. And so to come back to that same thing, that's a balm for our souls. And I think at its base, that is absolutely spiritual. That is very much a spiritual moment that allows you to heal, allows you to process and deal, because even though I don't even read it as you putting off those difficult things you're dealing with, but more of being able to compartmentalize and process with something that helps you focus your attention. So I think that at its core, that's incredibly spiritual. And so I love that answer. And I love your willingness to share that with us. That's outstanding. And we will continue to send positive light and thoughts and force your way for your aunt and the things that are ongoing, because we also know that life is something that is currently changing, shifting, and ongoing for all of us. So certainly sending those positive thoughts your way as well.
Thank you.
So Return of the Jedi is where we are digging in. This is the first episode. So we're starting for anybody that's watching, anybody that's listening to the podcast version, we start at the beginning. We start at 0 minutes, 0 seconds, and we go to right at like 22:08. And the cut was perfect where this segment of our sacred text today ended. So we're going to jump into Return of the Jedi. And I'm just going to I've got 3 guiding questions that I usually use when we do these canon studies. And I want to ask them to you, hear your thoughts, and then kind of ping pong off of what you say with the thoughts that I had. So the first question in these 22 minutes, the beginning of Return of the Jedi, the first question is, what is our text telling us? What did this text say to you as you rewatch these 22 minutes that I'm sure you've seen, like me, thousands of times? But looking at it in this light, what did these 22 minutes, what did the text say to you?
I would say within the realms of the story, to me, because you can look at it in so many different levels, you can look at it as an action piece. There's, it's setting up the big stuff to come. It's definitely setting the tone for the rest of the movie. Those first 22 minutes are very important because beyond the scroll up telling you Luke Skywalker's returned to the desert planet of Tatooine, yada yada yada, it tells me that the Emperor is getting impatient. Because I think if you think the Clone Wars, which was the biggest conflict the galaxy had ever seen, went on for 3 years, and the Galactic Civil War went on for 4, so it feels like the Emperor's impatient. You sense that when Vader turns up on the Death Star, Gerard is ready to be quite. He's nervous, but he's ready to be quite firm, and that crumbles like icing sugar in no time because the Emperor's telling him, the Emperor is displeased with our apparent lack of progress. It's
and I love,
things have got to move on.
As an adult who works in a corporate culture, there's something about those moments that I watched this time that hit me differently than they have in other times. Like, I have a wonderful boss, and that's not to say that my boss is anything like the Emperor. She's not. But also just like as a grown up, like watching those scenes and seeing those moments and like the nervousness, like you said, Jerjerrod is just like, he's making his excuses. But then all of a sudden, the Emperor's coming and everything changes and everything, he snaps a little straighter, he stands up. But the other moment that stood out to me, and this was I don't know why I've not noticed this as much before. It's a very intentional moment of as Vader's shuttle is heading towards Death Star 2, the whole part about the clearance codes stood out to me more than it ever had, because that's what we get later when they go to Endor and the code and the shuttle and the clearance. And I don't know why that's such a small thing that I never noticed as much before, setting that particular little tidbit up.
That's a great observation, because I've never considered that. But yeah, you're right. Obviously, the two links, one tees up the other. But what if that clearance code hadn't passed? Can you imagine being a pilot of that shuttle when the other guy has to turn to Lord Vader and say, "Really sorry, Lord Vader, but our clearance codes haven't passed.
They're not going to let us in."
They'll be bouncing around the cockpit like Kylo Ren does in Last Jedi. I mean,
exactly.
I've never thought of that. That's a really good observation.
Yeah, but I love that. I love that what you're seeing and what you're getting out of the text telling us, especially up front, is the Emperor. We've got this big, heavy, there's this big thing coming our way. It's, we're tied to the train tracks and that train is coming whether we like it or not. There's an impending doom, I guess, is what it really feels like.
Well, it says a lot, really, when you think Vader is the brute, he's the heavy, he's the Captain Phasma, if you want to make a comparison, in A New Hope. You know he's powerful, he's got a history with Obi-Wan, but basically he's the imposing brute character that's there over Tarkin's shoulder. Tarkin's the talent in that film, the bad guy, the focal bad guy. Vader looks the part, but he's not so in Empire. He certainly is, but of course his foundations are shaken by the whole business with Luke. You get to Jedi, which is only a year later, and clearly a lot's happened, but still, we're learning that in the comics at the moment, with War of the Bounty Hunters and such. But he's still Darth Vader, and he's coming to tell us as an audience, and to Jerjerrod as well, that the real bad guy's coming now. The real boss is turning up. You better swab the deck to make sure everything's shipshape, because he won't be as forgiving as I am.
And it's so interesting that you say that, because again, this is hitting me as you're mentioning it. Tarkin in New Hope really is like, Vader's there and we're scared of Vader, but Tarkin's kind of the main guy, and Vader is seemingly working for Tarkin. He's seemingly, which is interesting to me, because I have in my Star Wars collection, and I don't know what the equivalent would be. Actually, it would be the Burger King glasses. And they all had the little description on the back. Well, there was a regional fast food restaurant called Burger Chef. It wasn't Burger King, it was Burger Chef. And they did the same promo posters that matched the artwork for those glasses. And I have 3 of the 4. I'm missing one. But on the Vader poster, in the description, it describes Vader as the right hand or working for Grand Moff Tarkin. Vader has and so then you look at it, and what you said is what hit me. That stands out because I think about that poster and I think about the movie and all that. But then in Empire, Vader's never quite fully, he's more of the main guy than he is in either side in Jedi and New Hope. Because then we get to Jedi and it's the Emperor. And of course we get Vader's redemption out of it. Vader has Vader has always been fighting to find his place. Vader has always been, in a lot of ways, a second fiddle, which we don't always stop and think about, but that's a conflicted character who has to deal with that conflict, especially in this movie.
And it's especially interesting, I think. Now we're getting gaps filled between A New Hope and Revenge of the Sith, obviously, with all the content we've got coming. And I'm sure there'll be more that will tell us stuff about. I'm expecting Andor to have Vader in it. We know Obi-Wan's going to have Vader in it, but I'm expecting Andor as well. So I think that dynamic, because I think with Obi-Wan, for example, I'm slightly off track, but with Obi-Wan, it's more personal to Ben. But I think with Andor, it's more relevant to the story of how the rebellion gets ready. And I think we'll learn a bit more about the dynamics between the Emperor and Palpatine at that particular point. But like you say, you get to Empire, and that's Vader's moment in the sun as the prime bad guy of the piece. But he still kneels to the Emperor. You know, it's kind of, there's similar stuff in the sequel trilogy with Kylo and Snoke. But yeah, I think by the time you get to Jedi, and we've always known about the Emperor. You know, we read about him in the first page of the novel back in '76. So we've always known. We've never quite seen him properly. Lady's face, monkey eyes, the whole thing. But to get to this point now and to know that the real evil is coming is quite potent when you think about it.
Absolutely. Well, and even the power of the Emperor, which ties into what you said about this kind of impending doom, this thing that's coming. That's what Vader shows up to tell Jar Jar, like, he's coming, bro. Like, time's up. You done messed up now. He's coming for you. But even, and I love how you said that with Empire. Empire is kind of Vader's movie, or should be, as the bad guy. But even in the midst of having those moments, like, he's in the midst of the chase of the Falcon in the asteroid field. But when he gets the message that the Emperor wants to talk to him, the first thing he does is say, we got to get out of here. We got to get out of the asteroid field. We got to get a clear signal. He's not playing around. Like, he still kneels, as you said, he kneels to the Emperor. The Emperor always had that power, even when Vader was doing something that he knew he wanted to do, which was very personal, I think, in Empire. He knew who Luke was. And at that point, it was a personal pursuit that over the course of Empire becomes the Emperor's pursuit, because of course the Emperor is always playing both sides against the middle to get what he wants.
Yes, exactly. And I think that just slightly going back to the prequels is, you kind of knew the Emperor was going to do that. But when you look at Empire and Jedi, in that Palpatine's ready to ditch Vader in a heartbeat if he can replace him with Luke, because Luke could be the Anakin that never was because of what happened at Mustafar. It makes you realize how clever the writing is to tilt those two sides, with Palpatine smack in the middle, and he can go whichever way he wants. And he's kind of doing it again on a macro, on a smaller, minor scale, with Anakin, Luke, and that situation. So yeah.
You've hit on kind of that opening part. We have Vader showing up on Death Star 2, telling him the Emperor's coming. But then the next part of this clip, or of our sacred text, is also at Jabba's palace, and there's a lot there. Is there anything that the text tells you versus asks of you, because that's our next question, that you're getting out of that other part? What else do you see there?
There's a few things there. One, never let 3PO in on the secret. I think R2 knows everything. Everything is a surprise to 3PO.
That's a great way to put that.
He's had his memory wiped for a reason. So I think it's quite genuine. 3PO's reaction is quite genuine for a droid. So when everything that happens, gate opening, droid coming out, walking in, seeing the Gamorreans, the Bomar monks, the whole thing is genuine. He even believes that Luke's message is the wrong message. How can it be the wrong message? R2 knows everything, because R2 knows, as George said, knows everything. The ultimate USB stick. So I think, and also I think there's Jabba's obviously it's very old. So Jabba's seen it all. He's done it all. He's not scared of Jedi, because mind tricks don't work on him like mind tricks don't work on Watto and stuff like. There's certain characters that they don't work. They're related, I think. Toydarians and Hutts are related somewhere, and so Jabba's got understandable confidence that, hey, it's a Jedi, so what? I mean, have you seen the Clone Wars movie? I've dealt with these people before. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal to him. To Luke, it feels very transitional. We just mentioned transitional for Vader. It's definitely transitional for Luke, because he never really properly finished his training. I know a lot of people are talking about this online at the moment, about the scene from The Mandalorian. There's some really good observations there about some of the things that Luke says that kind of start to nudge you towards where you find him in Last Jedi. This is a period where he's not he's completed his training enough. In an ideal world, he's nowhere near completed his training, but needs must. So they've got to go with what they've got. Luke's the only hand that they can really play with. They haven't got time to train Leia, even if they wanted to. They know she's there, but it's got to happen now. So they've really got to just show their hand and play it. So it's quite a situation for Luke as well. And coming into Jabba's palace, okay, we know there's a lot of, he's dressed in black, he's cloaked. Right. They're putting the doubt. It's a filmmaker's process. They're putting the doubt in the viewer's mind of, hey, is this guy, has he turned to the dark side? Because even though we didn't have an internet between Empire and Jedi, we had Starlog, we had Starburst, we had magazines, people talk. So all the rumors are out there anyway. And goodness knows there's so many rumors between Empire and Jedi, so many rumors. It was, again, brilliant filmmaking.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I love, one of the things you and I talked about before we came online was in the, I still call it Star Wars, but a lot of people would call it New Hope. In the Star Wars episodes of Canon Studies, in the Empire episodes of Canon Studies, we assigned topics to what we were talking about. Each episode. But what I decided to do for Jedi was assign the text, but not assign a theme to it, because I want to find out kind of naturally, what are the themes that bubble up? What are the things that you see versus what I see? And honestly, in everything you've said so far tracks, and I don't think I'm tainting it by putting my idea out there. So I'm going to ask you first, actually, if you were to assign a theme to these 22 minutes that we're looking at from our text, what do you think the theme of these 22 minutes might be?
Wow, that's a good question. How would you succinctly put that together? That's a really good question. I've never thought of it in those terms. I mean, it's scene setting, it's establishing, but that's a filmic thing, not a thematic thing for the storyline. I guess. I mean, theme wise, I guess showing your hand a little bit. Maybe that's badly phrased, but Luke is coming in to let Jabba know who he is, and don't mess with me, I'm a Jedi. And whether or not Jabba gets that or doesn't, because Luke's got limited experience with Jabba, he doesn't know that going in. Sure. Vader's coming in to prepare to a degree, not overtly, because why would Vader care about Jajerod? But he's kind of letting this whole team, 250,000 people working on the Death Star. You need to pull your finger out because the Emperor's coming. So it's all about preparing people. It's warnings. Maybe that's the theme. Maybe warnings is the thing. Luke is warning Jabba. Luke's warning Jabba that you need to hand Solo over to me, or over, obliquely, or else. Vader's not so subtle. It's you need to get this built, or else. Yeah. So I guess warnings would be the theme. I'm working that out as I'm saying it.
No, I very much put you on the spot. And I think with Vader, and like you said, Vader's not subtle. And to put it very colloquially, Vader showed up and said, it's time to piss or get off the pot. It's time to move. And I like what Pete says. Jedi has so much happening in the first 20 minutes. And so you're right. It's hard to nail it down into a specific theme. What I pulled out of it was kind of a twofold. And of course they do play together, and part of it plays to exactly what you said. But the theme that I ultimately pulled out of it was fear and uncertainty, because you've got Jajerod who's fearful. When he finds out the Emperor's coming, he's scared. He doesn't know what the uncertainty is. He doesn't know what that means. But then when we pivot to Jabba's palace, 3PO is scared, especially when he finds out, what do you mean that's the right message? And we're, are you sure nobody's home? And 3PO is a fearful character anyhow. That's a part of the being of that character. He's the nervous Nelly. He's, always, and that's why we love him, because he's on edge. But also going forward from there, we have Leia shows up as Boushh, however we say that. She shows up, and there's the initial, is the uncertainty, is this going to work? Is this going to whatever? But then she's revealed, because Han gets revealed. Yeah. And what I love in that moment is Han seems scared to me. And I didn't notice that as much until I watched it this time. He's blind, obviously. Yeah. But when he's like, hold on, Jabba, wait a minute, after she's let him out, and the thing drops and it's the big sting and, oh, we've still got you, whatever. He was very fearful. And I loved how Harrison played that. in that moment. So there was a fear there. Then we get, kind of going forward from there, Leia's attitude when she's, in disguise as a bounty, that's bold. But then the jig is up and you get caught with your hand in the cookie jar. There was some fearfulness there, although she still remains strong and we see what she does, going forward. But to me, the biggest theme I pull out of these 22 minutes is kind of fear and uncertainty. It plays along throughout all these different parts. And then there's one other thing that I want to hit when we get to the end. So looking at that, and that, again, that ties to what you're saying, showing your hand, the uncertainty and the showing your hand, those two things to me kind of go right together. So the second question that we use in our canon studies is we've asked, what is the text telling us? So the second question is, what is the text asking of us? What is it asking us to think, believe, etc.?
It's asking us to believe that Luke is probably more advanced in his training than he actually is.
Absolutely.
There's a little, again, it's a filmic thing, but Luke wears it, so you've got to take it as canon that's his choice. He's presenting himself visually as a different guy to the beige, suit in Empire and the the judo sumo suit in Star Wars. He's coming in as the Man in Black. So he's giving us a different presentation, which isn't a million miles from Vader. Obviously, the whole black outfit thing. I think. What was the question? Give me the question again. What was the question again?
The first one is, what is the text telling us? The second one is, what is the text asking of us?
Yeah. So I think it's asking us to believe in the moment that Luke is more than he actually is. Okay. I think it's also probably asking us to trust that he's more than he is, because we kind of know he isn't. And there's always been that untold tale between sort of Empire and Jedi, and how much did he really know? Was there any communing with other characters? What did he learn? The comics are doing a nice job of sort of filling that in. Sure. I think maybe that's it. That's maybe what it would be.
I agree with you completely. And I think it's asking us, and this is such a broad spiritual kind of thing, but it's asking us to believe in Luke. It's asking us to believe that, yes, everybody's scared right now, but everything's going to be okay. Yeah. And the thing that I said that, may play in at the end, and I'll bring it up now, I think that is reinforced with Chewie and Han right before we cut the end of this scene, because Chewie grabs Han. He starts doing that, running his paw through his hair, and Han saying, "It's all right, pal. It's all right, pal." Han's still scared, and you can kind of hear it in his voice. Yeah. But he has to believe the two of them are together, so it's going to be okay. And I think that, and of course he knows Leia's there somewhere, but I think that's the thing it's telling us, or it's asking of us, is it's asking us to believe everything's going to be okay. Yeah. And I think that's the big, bold step.
Yeah. And that's important as well, because like in most films, the gang separate. Star Wars, we had a lot of them together on the Death Star. Luke goes and does his heroic thing, but Han turns up. First part of Empire, they're all together. Then Luke's off to way out to Dagobah, and they're off to Bespin, and not a million miles away from each other. But they're separated until in Crisis they're brought back together. So, and I think also it's a great point about Han feeling fear. I mean, I think when I know when I was a kid, everyone wanted to be Han Solo. Correct. He was the cool one. Harrison, totally. Harrison Ford is just the coolest guy on the planet and always will be. So who wouldn't want to be Harrison Ford or Han Solo rather? But
or Indiana Jones for that matter. Both of those two guys right together.
Indy as a character, John McClane is such an Indiana Jones character because he gets beaten up and keeps getting up and keeps going. Yes. And there's great characters that just take the punches and keep going. And Indy's the archetypal guy who'll just walk through a punch.
Yeah, and I always said for me, my two favorite Star Wars characters have always been R2-D2, which I have a thought that I want to circle back to at the very end about R2. But the other one was Han Solo. And the reason I loved Han Solo is the same reason I loved Indiana Jones, which was they didn't have special powers. They didn't have the Force. They didn't have Indy shooting the sword guy was like, and Indy just trying things, and Han just trying things. Like, my favorite Han Solo line is simple tricks and nonsense.
Yeah.
That, when he, like, that's an everyday guy kind of thing. And I could aspire to be an everyday guy kind of thing. I will watch a James Bond movie and look at it and go, I could probably do that. I know in my head I can't really.
Yeah.
But Indiana Jones and Han Solo were the flawed hero that went, it usually works out. And when he argues with Chewie in Force Awakens, most of the time, yes, it does. It always works out. Whatever that, that was me, because that was a normal dude. And that was the part of the attraction to those characters. Indy and Han in particular were, they were special because of the swagger and the bravado. They weren't special because they had powers or something otherworldly. They just, figured it out. And, most of the time it worked and sometimes it didn't, but they kept going.
He can't see anything. He doesn't know where he is. Who's this weird voice? Oh, it's Leia. Oh, slight relaxation there. And then, like you said, with Chewie, another nudge down. Now Luke's telling him he's going to, we're stepping ahead a bit, but Luke's telling him we're going to figure it out. And there's another little relaxation. So I think there's a lot of relief within the tension as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a good, it's the balance. And Star Wars always strikes that balance, whether it's dark and light, whether it's, skilled and non-skilled. That's always a big part of the play in any of this entire saga. And so we see that same thing here. And like I said, if I were to pull a theme out of this, fear and uncertainty, well, similar, hit in different ways and are different, veins of the same conversation. So the third question is, where does the text send us from here? If we've looked at the themes, we've kind of pulled out what we've got. And of course, we know what's coming in the movie because we've seen it a bajillion times. But what is the theme? What is it sending us out into the world saying, this is what I'm telling you?
Well, starting with Vader, it's telling us that at this point of time, he's put aside his personal issues and he's focusing on the big picture, which is whatever the Emperor wants, is the big picture in that scenario, in that relationship. So Vader's very much on point to what the Emperor's plans are, which of course is the Empire's plans. So Vader's being the ultimate team player at that point, I would say. He's there on a mission from the Emperor to get this thing done. There's a bigger picture, and maybe I can sort my stuff out separately, because as we know, the story's going to converge to Endor and everything's going to come together in a relatively neat bow. But we don't know that at this point, and maybe the Emperor does, but Vader probably doesn't. So there's no guarantees that it's going to get there, because at this point we don't quite know who knows what, in the long play. So I think at this point you take away that Vader's put aside his own personal agendas and he's focusing on what the Emperor wants and what the Empire needs. For Luke, we haven't seen him fight the Rancor yet. We haven't seen him have the battle over the Sarlacc pit yet. Otherwise known as Boba Fett's worst day at the office. So, another person will be talking to you about that. But we know that we're heading towards some big conflict, because like Pete said in the chat, there's a lot going on in that 20 minutes, and it is relatively, it's not, because there's a lot of menace and there's a lot of reveals. I think we just cut from the Chewie bit to Luke turning up, so we're just ahead of that. But we've got a lot of moments where we're learning new things. Jedi is such a visual film, I think we'd take forward that there's reason to fear, but there's reason to be confident, because the gang's back together. Han's not at his best. We don't really know about Luke.
Well, and I think that's exactly right. And I think what you said, and I said, my two things that I kind of pulled out of it was fear and uncertainty. The fear parts are very straightforward, whether it's Jar Jar, whether it's Han being thought out and he's off kilter, like you said. That was a great way to put it. Leia's a little bit uncertain because she got caught in the middle of what she's doing. Of course, 3PO is freaking out because that's what 3PO does. So the fear covers a lot of places, but I think there's not as much fear, but the uncertainty with Jabba, and maybe even personified more with Bib Fortuna, with the hologram of Luke. Like, he's saying, he says this, and you can kind of tell Bib's buying it from the beginning, and he's telling it to Jabba, and Jabba's going, he's no Jedi. There's a little bit of a back and forth there, but like there's still an undercurrent for Jabba, even of, he said it and I have to be the boss and be strong and whatever, but he doesn't know. No. And so I think, the fear and uncertainty part is somewhat straightforward. And I think if you're asking, if I'm saying, where is the text sending us from here? It's the comfort of knowing, like you kind of said, there's somebody with you.
Yeah.
Han and Chewie are back together. For the two of them, that's comfort enough. Knowing that Leia's in the vicinity, knowing, Luke has sent this message. And of course we get, Han says, Luke's crazy. He's whatever. But like, even in our moments where we're low, just to hear a familiar name is enough to boost our spirits.
Yeah.
You talked earlier about those difficult personal moments with your parents, with your aunt, with your whatever. To hear a comforting name or theme or a Star Wars thing, like even in the midst of all that nonsense or difficult times, that boosts your spirits. It lifts you up. Even if it doesn't fix it, it gives you that next little bit that carries you to the next stop, to the next place on your journey. And that's where I feel like the text is taking us right now. It's saying, okay, this is where we are and it's not great, but we're moving forward. It's not a dead end. It's not a final stop. Yeah,
I agree. And I don't think it's apart from Luke diverting to Dagobah to have his sort of last moments with
sure.
Yoda, they pretty much stay together until Luke hands himself in way later on Endor.
Yeah.
So that unit is fairly tight for a good sort of third of the movie through the middle. So yeah, there's definitely
something that's
there.
Broken gets made whole again for at least a period of time. I had this conversation actually earlier this afternoon about the challenges that Twitter can be, especially when it comes to conversations and dialogue. And, this fandom that we love that sometimes gets derailed by things like Twitter and echo chambers. But with all the conversations and things we've heard, the complaints we've heard, especially about the sequel trilogy.
Yeah.
And this is off the topic, but you talked about the separation of the main crew from where we were in 4 to where we go in 5 to where we are here. The complaints about the sequel trilogy was like, nobody's together. But like, that's what Star Wars has always been. Star Wars has always been splitting up and going in a couple of different directions and doing these different things. So I don't know why it hit me when you said that, but it did. For all those sequel trilogy complaints, there's a part of me that goes, that's Star Wars. We split up, and at some point we end up back together, usually around a big moment.
Yeah, these are all capable characters. They're all leaders of a sort. Eventually, Luke grows into it. Leia was born to it. She'd have been a leader if she'd have been on Tatooine. That was Leia. Han Solo is his own man. So these characters can all go off and do their own thing. You could transpose that to the prequels. You could certainly take it to the sequels, as you say.
Yeah.
So it is. Yeah, if you look at it in that framework, it's definitely a part of Star Wars. Yeah.
It was very neat. And so, like I said, that was just a sidetrack that something you said sparked in my head. Speaking of something else that you sparked, and then I want to ask you about one other thing, and we start to wrap up our show. I talked about, you mentioned R2. And not having his memory wiped. And I loved how you said R2 is the USB stick of, he's the memory. Are you familiar with Ender's Game, Orson Scott Card?
I've seen the film, but I'm not familiar with the book. And I'm assuming the book's quite different to the film. So
it is. And I read the book in college, and it's despite and again, this happens everywhere, despite the problematic issues with the author, separating the author from the art. One of the big things in Ender's Game is the concept of speaker for the dead. And so what happens is, and it could be a eulogist, it could be, for us, that's what it would be. But it's this idea of, this is the person that when my life is over, your life is over, this is the person who's designated to speak for me, to say, this is who I was, this is what I want you to know, that kind of thing. To me, that's what I love so much about R2-D2 is R2-D2 is the speaker, not only for the dead, but for this entire legacy and saga and series. And that's why I love so much in Rise of Skywalker that he's with Leia at the end, because what we get is R2 with Leia at the beginning, and we get R2 with Leia at the end. And he's the one that's been a witness to this entire journey. We get the prequels, we get the original trilogy, we get the sequel trilogy, the things that he did. And that's another reason why I love this character so much, is like, he's the keeper of the lore, whatever you want to call it. He's the one that is compiling these stories without bias, without, I don't know why, something you said, again, the USB stick of it all stood out to me, but I've always loved, in fact, I've got on the shelf behind me, I've got a whole shelf of R2-D2 stuff because he's one of my favorites.
Same, just down there. Yeah.
But like that concept of speaker for the dead, keeper of the lore, it's very special to me. And I think when we think about legacy, when we think about whether it's even in our real life personal families, what is the legacy we pass along? What is the thing, that comes from parents? My dad loved Star Trek a lot. He loved Star Wars. And I got my love of Star Wars from him. I didn't get as much Star Trek from him, but I have a deep appreciation for it because of him and because of all those things. And so, like I said, when you said that earlier, I made a note to write, to bring that back up. But R2 as the one who carries that flame forward to me is really cool and really powerful.
Yeah, I think I love The Force Awakens. Really do love the film. My one gripe, pretty much my only gripe with that film, was that R2 was switched off when Luke disappeared, because that meant that time after Luke goes and then BB-8 kind of brings him back and he wakes up, there is a chunk of time that R2 didn't record, and that rankled a little bit, because it, as you just so nicely said, and I agree, he's the recording stick that's captured everything. And I think that was something that Lucas had said more than once, that it's almost as if, when Star Wars started, they went with the scroll, but originally it was a Wookiee mother sitting down to read a book to a Wookiee child, a bit like, Princess Bride type thing. I think it's George had said that I kind of imagine that this whole tale is told by, R2-D2, 2,000 years down the timeline, is recanting this tale of, I remember when, sort of thing. And it's all R2 telling you what happened in the Star Wars saga. But there is that quite a few years that he never captured because he was asleep, on was it Takar, the Resistance base? So, or wherever he might have been. So that was a shame. But nevertheless, I think, he knows where the bodies are buried. So.
That's right. He definitely knows where the bodies are buried. And also, and for even all the, the cool personality moments, the murder bot, soak him in oil, light him on fire, the things that he did, he was a badass in his own right. Totally. But more than that, I do love that he was a witness to this entire, the Skywalker saga, all of that. And I love what you said about those gaps. It's very neat. And again, that's something that always stands out, especially as I age and as I think about legacy and as a father and raising children and, those kinds of things. It's really powerful to hear those moments and those thoughts. So this is an amazing canon study. I love that ties into everything we're talking about, because we're very lucky that we're talking about Return of the Jedi. I didn't ask you up top, kind of because I forgot, but we're going to do it at the end. We have gotten the first episode of Book of Boba Fett. And I would love to hear Mark's, give me your quick thoughts about Boba Fett. What are you liking? What are you seeing? What do we got?
I was impressed. I wasn't blown away, and I didn't want to be. If that makes any sense, I didn't want to.
No,
it would have been really, it would have been really easy to come in strong with great action and big bang and blah 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 and reveals and yada yada. That's too easy. I think they've set the tone. They've answered a big question, which is how we got out the Sarlacc. Great. So you've got that moment. Other little nuggets that are sort of scattered in. They've laid out a breadcrumb trail of questions about the relationship with Fennec. Lots of other little things that are just set up now to show us the way forward. We just talked about it on Making Tracks. It's out on Tuesday, and one of the things that I asked my co-host Mark was, which is the A story in this episode? Is it the past or is it the present? And we really couldn't decide, because they really are running at a nice sort of parallel. I was really impressed with it. The music didn't blow me away. The visuals did. I loved it. I loved the design. So many things about it worked. But I'm kind of glad they didn't go crazy all in and just try and blow our minds. It just feels like a nice, steady progression to wherever they want to take us. Hopefully they'll take us to season 2, but who knows?
Yeah, I love what JD said. Loving the vibes on Book of Boba Fett. I think they're setting it up for some good stuff. And I'm like you. I watched it. I actually stayed up to watch it, which was 2 a.m. here. I won't be doing that every week. I was feeling it the next day. But it felt like it was important. And it was that moment where like I got to like 1:15 and I was like, now I'm starting to feel tired, but it's only 40. Like I have to see this through. Yeah. I'm not going to say that I didn't doze a little bit watching that first 2 a.m. viewing. But I also did get up and watch it with my 13-year-old, my daughter Harper, who loves Star Wars. And so we watched it the next morning and I got it again. I've seen it a couple times since then.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that set me up, and this was kind of it was an interesting move. The Hollywood Reporter article that came out right before where Robert Rodriguez was saying, like they said in print, we're going to blow people's minds. These people are smart enough that they don't normally say that. Like you don't, put it out there. You don't call your shot. But they did. And so, of course, I'm going to be honest. I bit into the hype a little bit. And I thought, so when the first episode ended, I went, okay. Like I wasn't blown away, kind of exactly what you said. I certainly didn't dislike it. But what tells me that it's working was even though I wasn't blown away, I was immediately ready for it to be Wednesday again. Like I'm ready to see the next one. And so I think that's exactly what good storytelling does. I love that they said the majority of the trailers were the first half of the first episode. Yeah. I don't want you to give it away early. I want to show up. I say this all the time. I need just enough in a trailer to remind me that it's still coming and then let me get there and find out what's happening and what's going on.
I think Marvel and Disney and Lucasfilm have been very savvy in that if you look back pretty much a year now to WandaVision, those first half-hour black and white, comedy episodes where people online were just pulling their hair out, like, what is this rubbish? And yet you get to the end of WandaVision and people are saying, why isn't this winning all the Emmys? It's an absolute stone cold classic, forgetting that for the first 2 or 3 weeks they were like, this is nonsense, until you reached a tipping point when everything changed. I think maybe this show could be something like that. Some of the Marvel shows are a bit more linear, like Hawkeye, for example, or Falcon and Winter Soldier. Other shows ask more of you, like WandaVision. And I'm thinking maybe Fett will be one of those shows because we're telling that story in 2 timelines as well. And there's a lot to soak up, and they've got a lot of things that they need to sort of square off with fans who've been around it a long time, because we have some reasonable, some completely unreasonable expectations, but nevertheless, things that we think we know about Fett because we've been reading about it for 40 years. So they've got to square off a lot of stuff, but also push the story forward. So it's a big ask, but I'm confident they can do it.
No doubt. Well, Mark, I think you said a mouthful when you said Star Wars fans with unreasonable expectations. So I think we both realize that that's the way it works. I love what Michael said. Give me a slow burn with a huge payoff at the end of the season. And I agree with that completely. I love the idea of give me just enough to be excited about next week. And let's keep going. Let's go from, I don't need, I'm actually, and I've said this, I love the week to week model, because if you gave me all 8 episodes at once, I'll watch all 8 episodes at once.
Same.
But I like the idea of being able to sit with it for a week, ponder it, think about it, talk to you about it, talk to Pete about it, talk to Michael about it, talk to whoever I'm going to talk to, bounce it off each other, and be ready for the next one. Because honestly, the more voices that I get involved in the way I consume these things, the better I'm going to approach it. Because if it's just me in my head, because I pounded all 8 episodes in 5 hours, it's not going to be as good. And it's
not a communal experience. It's not a communal experience then. Yeah.
That's right. And that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a communal experience. It's supposed to be something that we share together, even if we're thousands of miles apart like you and I are. We get to talk about what you saw, what I saw, those kinds of things. I think my biggest takeaway was before, and Pete and I did a preview show beforehand, just kind of looking at other people's theories. What do you expect? All that. And my biggest thing was I love the idea of it being called the Book of Boba Fett. And I love that in The Mandalorian, each episode was a chapter. It was chapter 1, chapter 2.
Yeah.
And so what I saw this being was a way to, okay, the first chapter is him escaping from the Sarlacc. The second chapter, maybe, like, it doesn't have to be a linear story. I like the idea of it jumping around. I don't know if that's completely what it's going to be, but what I like, and in this first episode, was the whole series could be balanced between flashbacks and present time.
Yeah.
And it could be a continual, we go here, and we work our way through it. And I like that kind of storytelling. I think we got that first most prominently in the first season of Lost way back in the day.
Yeah.
And I would love for them to play with that a little bit more and find the balance in all of it. So I'm excited for it. I wasn't blown away on the first episode, but I also definitely didn't not enjoy it. So I'm ready for more. That's really that's what's most important. I'm going to watch it again.
It is?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, totally agree.
So as we wrap this up, Mark, tell us where people can find you. Tell us what you've got going on. Give us all the plugs. Give us all the things, because we want people to continue to connect with you.
If you want to speak to me, and why would you? But if you do, then right below, prefect_timing on Twitter, that's where I am. So I'm always generally on there causing mischief and mayhem. Everywhere else, it's at FanthaTracks. So that's FanthaTracks for all the socials, FanthaTracks.com for the website. Within Fantha, you'll see at the top of the page, we've got links to our YouTube channels and our podcast. We've got 3 podcasts on the go, one more coming fairly soon. The weekly show is Making Tracks, which is myself and Mark Mulcaster. Mark's the XO of the Rebel Legion in the UK, or the CO rather. So he's a big wig. I have to bow to him every time we podcast together. There's generally stuff coming on Insider, occasionally stuff on StarWars.com. I also wrote for Starburst magazine here in the UK, which I'm quite proud of. Been there with them for about 4 years now, so that's good fun. But yeah, there's generally some nonsense knocking around. But prefect_timing is where you can find me. So that's where I'm hanging out to chat generally.
Absolutely. Well, as I said in your intro, and I will say it again, you are a bright light in our fandom, in our community. We love hearing your voice. We love seeing the positivity that comes from you, because certainly on this podcast and in so many others that I'm friends with and partner with, positivity is what it's about. We are the spark of positivity. We're going to be the ones to burn down the negativity in this fandom, because Star Wars is fun. And if we're not having fun, we should leave. Like, if we're not enjoying it, why are we here? Why do we hang out in things that make us angry? Thank you so much for hanging out today. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. I have gotten a ton out of it, and it was a great way to kick off the next 6 weeks of everything that we're talking about Return of the Jedi. Yeah,
I've really enjoyed it. My first podcast of 22, so thank you for that.
Hey, and that's a big honor for us that we get to be first and send you off into everywhere else. Hopefully we set the bar just high enough.
You did.
That everybody else after this you'll have to think about which one was the most fun.
I will. I always keep score, so you're doing well.
That's right. It's good. We did good. We kept score. Thank you to everybody that hung out today and watched with us. If you are watching later on the YouTube feed, thank you for being here. If you're listening on the podcast feed, thanks for always being a part of Podcast of the Whills. I'm going to hit one more quick thing about our partnership with ATG Cast, with Around the Galaxy, Disturbances in the Forest, and Streaming Star Wars, which will start this Friday. Thanks for being a part of that. Be watching over the next couple of weeks. We'll make this hopefully smooth transition to where you find us in your audio feeds, where you find us. If you are not a part of the Patreon yet and want to join that, it's patreon.com/ATGcast. You'll be able to get these live videos on Sundays or whenever we record. It may not always be Sunday, but when we have great guests, we want to connect you up with them. We want you to have a chance to be a part of that conversation as well. So thanks for hanging out today. Thanks for being a part of this, and we will see you again next Sunday for part 2 of Canon Studies, Return of the Jedi. And in the meantime, may the Force be with you, always.
Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Podcast of the Whills on ATG Cast. Make sure to follow us on all your social media channels at ATG Cast. Visit our website at atgcast.com to keep up with us. Follow, find some older episodes and stuff, or click to links for merch, or better yet, join our Patreon program. Or you can just go straight to patreon.com/ATGcast. And, yeah, I guess that's it. Copyright 2021 Pete in the Seat Studios. May the Force be with you, and, yeah, we'll see you next week. Yeah, that's it. Are we done? Alright, I'm out of here.